Order. Good morning. I call this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order. This morning we were discussing the redevelopment of the QE2. I'd like to remind everyone to place their phones on silent. We have a lot of people in the room today, so please make sure you place your phones on silent. We'll begin with introductions, starting with Mr. McKay.
Good morning and welcome. Hugh McKay, MLA for Chester St. Margaret's. Good morning. Bill Horn, MLA for Waverley Fall River Beaver Bank. I'm substituting for Brendan McGuire.
Morning. Benjamin Jessom, Hammonds Plains, Lucasville.
Good morning. Suzanne Lonis-Croft, MLA Lunenburg.
Good morning and welcome. Gordon Wilson. I'm the MLA for Clare Digby.
Good morning. Welcome. My name is Tim Houston. I'm the MLA for Pictou East.
Good morning. Dave Wilson, MLA for Sackville-Cobequid.
And Lisa Roberts, I'm the MLA for Halifax Needham.
Alan McMaster, MLA for Inverness, in your chair. We have the Auditor General with us this morning, Mr. Pickup.
Good morning, Michael Pickup, Auditor General.
And we have a lot of people in the room today, so I usually allow for more free flow of conversation between members and whomever is speaking, as long as there's not a change in speaker, but I may be a little more strict today because there are so many people in the room. We will start with all of our witnesses, beginning with Mrs. Perret.
Good morning, Denise Perret, Deputy Minister, Health and Wellness.
Good morning, Paula, LaFleche, Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Morning, John O'Connor, Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Good morning, Janet Knox, President CEO, Nova Scotia Health Authority.
Good morning, Paula Bond, Vice President, Nova Scotia Health Authority.
Good morning, Jeff Conrad, Deputy Minister of Internal Services.
Good morning, Victoria Van Hemert, Senior Director of the QE2.
Good morning, Gary Porter, Executive Director of Corporate Initiatives with Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Good morning, Brian Ward, Director of Major Projects, Nova Scotia Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Good morning, Craig Beaton with Department of Health and Wellness.
Thank you. And we have a number of opening statements, I believe. So we will start with Ms. Perret.
Good morning. It's good to be here. I'm pleased to be with my colleagues from Transportation and Infrastructure, the Health Authority, and Internal Services. The QE2 redevelopment is an important part of ensuring that Nova Scotia has a highly functioning healthcare system. We know that system is evolving, and this initiative helps to modernize and expand system capacity for both community and highly specialized healthcare services. So it's good to have the opportunity to be here to address your questions, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perret. Mr. LaFleche.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm pleased to be here to talk about the QE2 redevelopment project today and the role of our department, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. This redevelopment is about moving services out of the aging Victorian Centennial buildings on the Victoria General site of the QE2 Health Sciences Centre. But it isn't just about building bricks and mortar, a new hospital. It's an opportunity to have a look at how we deliver health care today and into the future. Our department is a key partner in this project. We oversee all of the construction, expansion and renovations, but we are also working very closely with the Nova Scotia Health Authority and the medical community to ensure our infrastructure is built to deliver the best health care services to Nova Scotians and Atlantic Canadians in a fiscally prudent way. The QE redevelopment project was publicly launched in the spring of 2016, but I want to mention that actually it was probably first conceived under the previous government in 2011, and I think the health minister in charge is across the former health minister is across the way there. But the public website and what the public sees was formally launched around 2016. It's not your average construction project. It's the biggest construction, the largest construction project we've ever done in Nova Scotia. It's huge. It's got a lot of moving parts, a lot of stakeholders, and we're not waiting for one piece to be put in place before we do another. We're working very much in parallel with all of the stakeholders, all the communities, to get facilities up and running as soon as possible. A good example of this is our renovation of an underutilized operating room at the Hants Community Hospital that was opened a couple of weeks ago. In fact, when we went in and looked at it, we decided to renovate the existing room as well as build a new one. So we've got 2 brand new 2020 standard operating rooms there, and they're forming part of the QE2 health delivery services. We believe that up to 800 more operations will be completed there each year, doubling the number of procedures that HANS was able to do and to contribute to the citizens of Nova Scotia. At Dartmouth General, the 3rd and 4th floor renovations are complete, and if you've been by the hospital recently, you'll know that the larger renovation and expansion project of an addition is well underway. This work will result in 48 more inpatient beds being available and doubling the number of operating rooms from 4 to 8 at the Dartmouth site. At the Halifax Infirmary, detailed design is underway for the 3rd and 5th floors for 2 interventional suites and a hybrid operating room. And once the bigger expansion project is done, the hospital will have about 500 inpatient beds in total, 28 operating rooms, and a new specialized outpatient centre. We have also bought property as part of the redevelopment project, like the former CBC building and its lands next to the infirmary, and we've also bought land in Bayers Lake for the new community outpatient centre to serve the suburbs. A critical part of this project is the master planning and programming, which determines what the QE2 development project will look like and where services will be delivered. The work that was awarded to Casey Architecture, one of Canada's top architecture and design firms, will help in preparing us for the future of healthcare service delivery in Nova Scotia. There has been a year-long consultation working with a broad range of stakeholders, including doctors, nurses, pharmacists, clinicians, non-medical staff, IT, and hospitals foundations, as well as the general public who are interested to contribute. Casey has submitted a draft master plan to the QE2 redevelopment team, which is made up of representatives from all of us here. We are now reviewing the plan, the team is, and it's not just as simple as reading a report, rubber stamping it. We're verifying that the plan, that our year-long planning represents and adequately reflects the input we got and adequately reflects the resources that we believe we need to go into the future. It's almost 800 pages long. This is an important phase of the project, and we need to take the time to get this right. Very shortly, we'll be able to put this plan in front of Cabinet and move ahead with the next stage on the infirmary site. We've been updating Nova Scotians on the progress of the QE2 redevelopment project every step of the way, whether it be on the website or through direct communication, and we will continue to do so. This is a huge project, one that Nova Scotians should be very proud of. It's the biggest project in Nova Scotia's history, the biggest public project of our time. There are lots of moving parts, but we are moving ahead on each one in a very systematic way. When it's all done, we hope that Nova Scotians will appreciate the rebuilt infrastructure for the health system that we are providing here. I want to also add that the media didn't have to take all those notes. I've got a one-pager which I'm going to submit, and Deborah Bayer will be available after to hand these out to the media, which basically summarize what I just said.
Thank you, Mr. LaFleche. Ms. Knox.
Good morning and thank you. I welcome the opportunity as well to be here with our colleagues from the Departments of Transportation, Infrastructure, Renewal, Health and Wellness and Internal Services. I also have with me Paula Bond, our Vice President, who is the Executive Lead for the QE2 redevelopment project, and Victoria Van Hemert, who is our Senior Director of the QE2 Health Sciences Centre and of this project. I just wanted to talk a bit about the QE2 Health Sciences Centre. It's a very busy place. On any given day, there are about 950 inpatients receiving care, with another 3,800 patients visiting a clinic, 118 having surgery, and 200 seeking treatment at the emergency department. In total, we have more than 1 million visits to the QE2 Health Sciences Centre every year, and those are people from across Nova Scotia and indeed Atlantic Canada for life-changing and life-saving care. With 10 buildings on 2 sites, the QE2 is a leading academic, research and teaching hospital which provides advanced medical care for the region's sickest patients and specialty care in almost every medical and surgical subspecialty, including heart health, for example, cancer services, neurosurgery, and organ transplantation. Today, many of those complex, highly specialized services are delivered in the aging Centennial and Victoria buildings in less than ideal situations. This includes services that aren't available anywhere else in this province, and in some cases, anywhere else in Atlantic Canada. Services like thoracic surgery and our organ and bone marrow transplant programs. So that's a big worry for us, given the age and condition of these buildings. As you know, flooding in September of 2015 was a stark reminder of the potential impact on patients when aged infrastructure does fail. While the people who work, learn, and volunteer in these buildings do their very best every day to ensure our patients and families have excellent care and good experience, moving services out of these buildings is a top priority. However, healthcare is changing, and so are the needs of our population, and we need to change as well. It would not serve anyone simply to build a replica of the current buildings and move patients and staff and equipment into it. And doing nothing isn't an option either. So the QE2 redevelopment project is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to rethink and rebuild the way we deliver healthcare in this province. It is our chance to really think about the needs of the population we're serving and organize our services and our facilities in a way that better meets the changing nature of healthcare and the needs of Nova Scotians today and into the future. This project makes the best use of resources we do have within the QE2 Health Sciences Centre and the surrounding communities to ensure services are delivered safely, efficiently, and in a way that can be sustained into the future. Nova Scotians are already benefiting from this approach. We are focused on delivering better care, creating better spaces for patients and their families and our care teams, and advancing the treatments and procedures offered here at the QE2 based on evidence, best practice, and the needs of Nova Scotians. We have a monumental task ahead of us, one that is unprecedented in this province. There are more than 7,000 staff, 700 physicians, 1,200 volunteers, and thousands of researchers, residents, and learners who support the work of this facility. Our team is fully committed to providing the full range of high-quality, safe services with minimal disruption during the life of this project and beyond. The QE2 Health Sciences Centre is a resource for all Nova Scotians and indeed Atlantic Canadians. In addition to providing excellent care, the QE2 is our leading academic and research institution supporting the development of future health professionals and shaping the future of healthcare delivery through world-class research. The QE2 redevelopment project is an investment in a healthier future for our province. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Conrad, did you have an opening statement?
Very brief. I just wanted to say good morning. Thank you for having us as the department responsible for shared services like procurement and IT services. I'm pleased to be here this morning to join my colleagues and very pleased with the work that the departmental staff do support two projects of this size. So thank you for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. We'll start with Mr. Houston of the PC Caucus for 20 minutes. Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opening comments. We do have a lot of people here this morning. Who is responsible for this project? Like, who has ultimate accountability to make sure this happens?
Mr. LaFleche.
I'll let John O'Connor go through that. There's actually quite a significant structure that has been put in place, and perhaps John should go through it.
Well, maybe we could just start with which department. We got some pretty influential people in the government here. A lot of quite frankly, a lot of salaries. Looking back at me here, like which person in the province is ultimately responsible? Which person? Which department?
For the construction, planning, design, and construction, it would be Transportation Infrastructure Renewal. For the health plan it would be the Department of Health and Wellness and the Nova Scotia Health Authority.
Okay, so has the health plan been finished? Maybe I'll ask Ms. Knox. Has the health plan been finished? Do we know? Because you did talk about, I think you used, we need to organize healthcare for changing needs. We know this project has started in many sense. Has the health part of it, has that reorganization and revisioning been finished? Does somebody put a tick mark in and said that's finished, over to the construction phase?
Ms. Knox?
Thank you for that question. Our work, of course, is to provide the functional planning, the programming for how we would need to use that facility. So that's been part of the work. That's been the big piece of the work that we've been doing over this past year. And Paula Bond leads that work on our behalf. So if you'd like to hear about that, she can talk to you about that process.
I'd like to hear about it in the sense that is it done? Do you know the functional needs, and is it kind of been completed? And have the functional needs been documented and kind of passed over to TRI to say, okay, now build this?
Ms. Bond.
Thank you. I couldn't say that we are 100% completed. We absolutely have the functional planning done to move the services out of the VG into the other facilities, such as HANS. As you heard earlier, our 2 operating rooms, the second one actually opened today. We're in the process of moving those services that are appropriate to HANS down to HANS. And also, we have identified the services that will be going to Dartmouth General once that construction is completed. We also know the services that will need to come from the VG, such as our multi-organ transplant services, our trauma services, our complicated oncology services. All of those services will have to come to the Halifax Infirmary site. Those are the most specialized complicated services that we deliver today and into the future for Nova Scotians. So we have those functional planning. To the very detail of some of the other planning, we know, for example, what we will be moving out into the community centre. We've met with the clinical leads, physicians and staff to identify what percentages of those services can move into the community. So I would say our functional planning has been submitted for the VG sites into government along with the master planning.
Okay. Would there be anywhere, I don't want to oversimplify it, but would there be like a nice succinct list somewhere that says currently done on this site, will be done here? Like, is it?
Yes.
That's what I would, so is that available then?
It's in for review and for approval. It has been submitted into government.
Okay, so is that something we could get as a committee?
I will have to defer to my government friends as to where that is in the process.
Mr. LaFleche?
Yeah. So the full functional plan, as I said in my talk, has been submitted. We are reviewing it now. We hope to have it through some sort of a government cabinet process in the next month or two, and then it will be revealed to the public. On the other hand, for the parts we have already completed, there are plans out there. I want to just step back for a minute, a very good question, but we're trying to avoid the mistakes that were done in other jurisdictions around different people not working together. So even though at the end of the day, Janet Knox, Denise, Perret, and I will be fired if something goes wrong, we're all working together, very closely together, and that's something we deliberately did from the very start of the party. Mr. Wilson would remember that under his tenure. When this started, it was a joint project between the health authority.
We can just in the interest of time, we might be able to get into some of that history as we kind of go through, but my specific question was about the functional plan and how healthcare delivery has been envisioned and organized. And what I've heard is it does exist at this point. It's not been approved by the government. But is that something that we could maybe request, Mr. Chair, as an in-camera or something, just to kind of get a sense as to where services are delivered now and how that will look in the future in a nice, succinct thing? Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll maybe see if we could request that information.
Just to clarify, so where services are delivered now, that would be something that would be, I expect, would be available, could be made available? I'm hearing a yes. I think Ms. Bond?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Houston, can you clarify beyond, can you restate what you're asking for beyond what's...
Well, where they're going to, so a certain service is delivered now at a certain building, and that's going to move. You mentioned some operating room movement and some movement of services to Bears Lake and stuff. So I would envision that there'd be a list that would say, these are all the things we do now, and this is where we do them. And when this is all said and done, not going to be there anymore, it's now going to be here, right?
Mr. LaFleche, perhaps to clarify, is that something that has been decided upon at this point, or is that something you're putting forward to Cabinet?
At a high level, we know the surfaces that will be available in the Halifax area, but if you want to know that something will be on the 3rd floor of a new building at Bears Lake, we're not quite there yet. So what I think we can do is we can, at a very high level, give you an idea where services will be within a few square kilometers, but not pinpointed to the exact building location.
That's fine.
And I think the exact building location will pretty well come, really this is John's area, in the near future. Do you want to comment on that? But we'll do our best to get you what you want so that Nova Scotians fully understand within this little geographic area, this is where it's going to be, but we don't know the floor yet.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, just, I mean, if something's going to be in Bears Lake, then it's going to be at Bears Lake.
Or it might be split between Bears Lake, Cobequid, and the infirmary.
That's fine. Okay, so that has been done. Pretty much, I think that level of planning. Now, I do want to move on to the kind of the construction and what's happening. So you mentioned 2 or 3 times in your opening comments, Deputy LaFleche, that this is the biggest project in Nova Scotia's history. How much will this cost?
Mr. LaFleche?
Great question. I'm going to defer that to John.
Okay, Mr. O'Connor.
Great, thank you. So I want to just take you back a little bit on the planning. So to answer the question on costing, I have to sort of take you through the process that's been worked on over the past year. So the first step is creating the program. So the program requirements, so those are basically how each program needs to function. That's what's being referred to on the functional program for each service in each department. And all of that information then drives what space do they need to function in. So all the spaces then are identified. So each department, all the spaces you need for what you're working in today, and that, by the way, the actual spaces that currently exist are in the document that was circulated prior to public accounts. They're all listed, and they was provided to the Casian group at the beginning of their work. So all of the services currently in the VG site, including the Victorian Centennial Building, are contained in that document. What we're working on then is, okay, that's how you're operating today, how you're going to function into the future. That's been identified now. The space that they require for the future, then how do those spaces work together by each department? And then we've taken that further into all of those spaces now have been created into floor plans. So the floor plans and then the shapes of those various floors. So, for example, if there's 11 ORs to be added to the Halifax Infirmary site, and by the way, it is the Halifax Infirmary site that we're planning to build most of this new infrastructure, and the Bears Lake site. So besides Dartmouth and Hants, and we have made provisions for property there on the Halifax Infirmary site for this new construction. So we've now got to the point where all of these space requirements are formed into plans, into shapes with various options of buildings. So OR floor plans, what has to be on one floor, what proximity to the ICUs, what proximity to recovery, and so on. All of that has been worked through where the patient floors would be, and we have been costing as we go. So getting to answer your question, so as we're costing, we're looking at options. Could it be here? Could it be there? Could the building look shaped like this? Could we add it on this end of the infirmary? Could we add it on over by where the gardens are currently, over by the CBC building? What's the cost? So we're costing as you're planning. That's a normal process. So all the buildings that we do follow the same process, whether it's this large project or whether it was Dartmouth we just finished we're through all these steps in Dartmouth General, and we're in construction. For Hants was the same. It's the same for all the schools, and I've been at this for 30-some years, and many projects, and they all follow the same flow. And the costing is done at various stages. So we cost at planning. At the end of planning, we have a Class D estimate. And then whether it's P3 or whether it's traditional delivery, doesn't matter. It then moves through various stages of design, and there's costing incorporated in every stage of design, and your cost estimates become. So we are costing all along. It's premature at this point to give out numbers because we have a number of options. We know it's driven by the fine tuning of those options.
So you just described a very detailed process of where things are going to be on which floor.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it exists.
Yeah, we have a lot of that created now.
Yeah.
We have not brought this forward to our government.
I was just waiting for a drum roll to get a number, but at the end I got, well, there's no number, but there is a number.
There are numbers. We have numbers. We don't do this work without costing.
So and there's different classes of estimates. You referred to one, a D3 or I don't know.
Yeah.
So there's different classes of estimates. Some of them are plus or minus 30, some are plus, and they just kind of fine tune it down. You have an estimate though, but you have one you're not willing to share.
So
I guess
for the work that I'm describing here, we're not at the point where it can be shared. For Dartmouth General, and as we got along a little further, we were at the end of design development. We promised to share that, and we did share that. Then we started construction, and we're keep updating those cost estimates, and we're sharing those as well. For
so there's nothing there. You're not able to give me a number today as to how much this all costs?
No, I'm not able to give you a number today.
Okay. Is Deputy LaFleche able to give me a number?
Mr. LaFleche?
Well, no, I'm not really, and there's several reasons. John described some of them. One is, of course, we don't want to give out too many numbers before we get tenders in, because that's never a good way to bargain with the builders.
Maybe I'll ask a different question then, Mr. Chair. How much have we spent so far?
Mr. O'Connor?
The QE2, sorry.
For the redevelopment.
For the QE2 redevelopment, including Dartmouth, so on. The expenditures to date, I think, are in around 40 million. And that includes construction that's being built, of course, in Hants and in Dartmouth General. So if you're looking at numbers for the planning work, it's the contract for Kasian and the programmers who are Agnew Peckham, or the team that did the programming work, part of the Kasian team. Contract is about 1.9 million, and we're essentially at the final stages of that work.
Okay, so $40 million has been spent so far, and that's land purchases and construction and planning and stuff, and some element of the 40 is on planning. But I just want to make sure I'm hearing this correctly. So $40 million into the redevelopment project, we're not able to have an estimate of how much the whole thing will cost.
No,
Mr. LaFleche?
But you asked how much we spent. John, maybe we could, I don't know if we can add it all up today, but we can give you sort of a number of what we've announced publicly, because we've announced somewhere around 138 for Dartmouth. We announced a number for Hants. We've done planning, but right back to Minister Wilson's, I don't know if I can still call him that, but the Honourable Wilson's era, we were doing planning and background work. So we can roll all of that into a number of what's been publicly out there today, if you'd like that. And that would be north of 138, obviously.
Okay, so, all right, so.
But that's not spent. You asked what was like actually spent out the door.
Yeah, no, I've got a series of questions on that. So the first question I had was, how much is it going to cost in totality? And there's no willingness to share a number for that right now. And then the second question was, how much have we spent so far? And that was 40 million. And then you've just offered another number, which is the different, is somewhere in between how much we've actually spent and how much we will spend. Right, and you're suggesting
that we've announced so far that we will spend.
So will be at least 138 million, because that's what's announced.
Yeah, I think, John, do you have a better number than that?
138 million.
Mr. O'Connor, the only reason I have to recognize you so we catch you on the record, your mic comes on.
Yeah,
proceed.
Sorry for that. Yeah, so the 138 million, just to be clear, has been publicly announced. That's for Dartmouth General expansion and renovation project only.
Yeah, I hear that's $1 billion undertaking. Would anyone dispute that it's going to be $1 billion?
Like I said, I'm not prepared to give out numbers today. It's premature to give numbers to this stage. We have a process where we're actually involved in now analyzing how we may deliver this work through a P3 delivery versus traditional delivery, and we want to keep that pricing under wraps, because part of the overall analysis will be what's the value for the taxpayers if we're delivered one way versus another. And then if we do go through a P3 delivery model, then we want to keep those costs to ourselves so that we can compare against submissions we get from the
Okay, thank you for that.
Team.
Thank you for that. I guess what I would do, Mr. Chair, through you, is I'd ask for the list of what's been spent to date, the actuals, so that'll come up to somewhere around 40, and the separate list would be the announced, which Mr. LaFleche says would be somewhere around 138, or it could be more. But that's so that's that. But I do want to talk about the Cassian report. So I understand that was cost a couple $1 million. It was referred to in the opening as, I think at some point it was referred to as a big report, maybe 800 pages. Would it be fair to say that that is the blueprint for this whole redevelopment project?
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Okay.
And not including, of course, Dartmouth. So just as we talked about QE2 in our minds, it includes all of the components that we were referring to, so Hants and Dartmouth and so on, right?
Okay.
But yes, for the work that's being planned to empty out Centennial and Victoria buildings into other locations, this is the blueprint, if you want to put it that way.
Okay, that's fair. And you have it. It exists.
It does exist, and it's in final draft form, under some level of review, and there's some additional little pieces that we're still trying to tie down with, for example, traffic studies.
Okay.
And,
so it's the final draft. So that implies that there was earlier drafts. When did you get the first? I understand the final draft came sometime in December, so a couple months, but presumably drafts of this started appearing earlier, and I guess I'm curious as to, when can we see it? It seems like we've been talking about this project for a long time. The draft is there. When can the people of Nova Scotia reasonably expect to see what this blueprint is? Is it within the next week or something? Or?
So I can answer about drafts. So yes, there are drafts all the way along. So any piece of work that we hire out to have consultants work on, we get drafts all the way along, we review. So the first most significant draft was in around July.
Okay.
That finished the main programming work. It's been tweaked after that. Then you get into the master planning, where all these spaces fit. So that's been happening since July. So to answer your question, we're very close in the final draft. We have to bring this information forward to government for direction and approval.
Do you have a date for that to go to government?
As Deputy LaFleche said, we are focused on that now. In the next month or two, we hope to be in front of government with this information and to provide the product of the last 12 months worth of work.
So that would imply, if it's a couple months and the first drafts would have been pretty meaningful. They probably would have been 80 or 85% of the way towards what the final was. So that would imply that it's almost going to be a year from the time the first drafts were made available to the time it went to government. It just seems like a long time, but am I over?
No, we had originally communicated that this work would be at least 12 months of work, and it has been about 12 months worth of work. And one of the things that we're doing in parallel, I mentioned earlier, is to assess how we deliver on this work. So that work that's being done by Deloitte to analyze the P3 versus traditional delivery could only really start once the casing work was complete.
Order.
So
I'm sorry, we've run out of time. We'll move to the NDP Caucus. The Honourable Dave Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. And there's definitely a lot of interest in the province on this project. I think there's been a commitment from all three parties who have been in government that the need is there to do this project. And Nova Scotians are just waiting to see when that will happen. So I know we've heard some questions around financing and costs. What is the expected date that you have on the project that things would be finalized? People will be moved out of those two facilities. Procedures, services will be given in other locations. Do you have a date in mind?
Mr. O'Connor.
Okay, I'll try to address that. So it's similar to the costing answer that I gave earlier. So part of the work, as we're doing the planning, is to look at time and scheduling. So if we do it this way, if we do it that way, if we build the building sort of here, could you build them together at the same time, these two buildings that may have to be added to that site, or would one have to be done ahead of the other? So all that drives time. So as we're working through this, we're doing timelines on a regular basis, and then we're looking at from beyond, so that's about like how long would it take during construction or during design. So a lot of that's being mapped out, and we have the same process we followed for all other projects. We provided timelines for Dartmouth General. We provided timelines, which we already completed for Hants, so on. So no different for this work. It'll take the same approach. At this point in time, we have estimated some timelines on the website in May or April of 2016. We are targeting 22 or beyond, 2022 or beyond, to be finished to the point where services could be completely emptied out of the Victorian Centennial Building, but there will be some services, as Paula Bond had mentioned earlier, that will be moved out of those buildings as other things come online. So Dartmouth General, for example, we're targeting the expansion project to be, the addition to be ready around 2020, and then the rest of the work at Dartmouth be late 21 into early 22. So as all those things come online, as Hants just came online, all of that is part of the overall schedule of and I guess we use this word decanting, which nobody likes, but that's the one that seems to have been used a lot with the emptying out of the Victorian Centennial buildings.
And I mean, the biggest component to this from our point of view, or our position, is what options and how are you proceeding forward with the remainder of the bills? You've mentioned P3 options. It's no secret we've advocated for a number of years now that shouldn't be the avenue the province goes down, but that's going to determine, I think, the timeline. So when would you expect a decision from the government on the financing is going to come from Treasury Board, or the financing is going to come from some P3 model? Do you expect more clear of a path forward come in a month's time or a couple of weeks' time when the budget's unveiled here in Nova Scotia?
So we haven't been able to provide the government with all the information yet. So the work that Deloitte is doing is going to scheduled to be completed in around the end of April, in the early part of May. Then we have to again review that work and make sure it's in keeping with what we've contracted them to do. And then that's part of the decision making. That information will be that, together with the WAT, which is the programming and the work from Kasian, will then help inform the government to make a decision.
So with that information being handed to government and the decision makers, are you looking at design build? Are you looking at design build finance? Are you looking at design build finance and operate? Are all those options still on the table?
Yeah, or at this point in time.
Okay, we'll hear from Mr. Porter, if that's all right.
Good morning. Thank you for the question. I think if you're seeing a theme here, one is process is important. We contracted with Deloitte in 2017 to really help advise us on how to arrive at a decision on whether we go to a design, build, finance, maintain, or a traditional method of delivery. Some of the work that went into that is really critically important. First of all, we've asked them to examine projects and findings of hospital P3s elsewhere in Canada. In doing so, we want them to really place a lot of emphasis on Auditor General findings, process-related deficiencies, if you will. What worked really well, and what could be improved, or what have they found in those jurisdictions? That was an extensive piece of work. From that helps us design a business case process that will really get at whether or not it's in the best interest of Nova Scotia to move forward with an alternative procurement. Okay. The range includes a traditional design bid build, which is usually the government approach, up through to a design, build, finance, and maintain, and pretty much everything in between. And we'll examine those options, narrow it down to a few.
Thank you for that. And I know Mr. LaFleche indicated that the group is trying to avoid past mistakes, and there has been projects in other jurisdictions that have gone severely off the rails when it comes to P3 hospital rebuilds and redevelopments. And the former Deputy Minister of Health, in a briefing to the Minister a couple of years ago, indicated that. And I would hope that the current Deputy might hold that opinion also. Just quickly, and I'm going to hand off to my colleague. You talked about the Hants Community Hospital and doubling the procedure capacity there. I don't know if you're aware of what's happening currently in our system around patient transfer and EMS in the province, but there are communities today that are not being covered because of the delays of transferring care over. When I hear about this, I know paramedics in the province are going to say, here, we're going to increase the number of transfers to Hants now. Has there been any talk on enhancing EHS, increasing transfer capacity so that emergency ambulances are not being used to transfer people from Halifax to Windsor, creating even worse scenario down the road once the doubling of procedures happen there?
Ms. Bond?
Thank you. And yes, we're aware that we're working very closely with EHS on all of the transfer issues that we are facing today and the emergency department services. But hence, the increase in ORs is an increase in day surgeries. These are not patients that will be transferred from the Halifax Infirmary or from Dartmouth General or other areas. These are patients that would have normally, in a lot of cases, have to have come into Halifax to have their surgeries done because they did not have the capacity in Hants. Now we're thrilled, as are the physicians and the community of Hants, that we will be able to offer double the surgeries, outpatient surgeries that are omitting having to have the not only travel into Halifax, downtown Halifax, and all the complications that go with that. So in working with EHS and with our Department of Health and Wellness colleagues, we do not anticipate that particular situation to have an impact on the transfer services.
And I wish we had a lot more time, because I'd love to dive into more of what the current situation is. But I will pass my time off to my colleague here.
Ms. Roberts.
Thank you very much. Is there utilization data available on the existing infrastructure that we are, all of this project is aimed at replacing?
Ms. Bond.
Thank you. Sorry, can you clarify the question for me? I was thinking more of the infrastructure and looking at Mr. O'Connor.
I'm looking at the space that is available now for all the different procedures, all the different work that happens within the QE2 complex. And is it fully utilized, and for what portion of the week, of the hours of potential operation, is it actually fully utilized?
Well, we always look at efficiencies and where we can be more efficient in the system. Unfortunately, with the VG infrastructure, that's not always possible. We have continual pressures there at the VG. I do want to make a comment, though, that we are very proud of the quality of service that's delivered at the VG, but certainly utilization of operating rooms, of beds. We all know that we have bed pressures within the QE2. We look at it's a daily assessment of who are in those beds, what are the priorities for patients in beds and the ORs, as well as the emergency services. So we constantly are reviewing that.
I guess I'm thinking more forward-looking. You know, we know that we're at the early stage of the baby boomer population aging into a phase of life where they need, you know, more medical care in Nova Scotia. We're looking to replace spaces that are, yes, currently not as functional as they could and should be, but how are we adjusting what we're building to anticipate efficient spaces that are also used efficiently through centralized scheduling, through maximizing how people work together, so that we're not building more space just because maybe two different teams don't agree on when the OR should be given to them, for example. And I'm seeing some nods over there, so I don't think I'm completely off my rocker.
Thank you for the clarification and an excellent question. We are absolutely looking at population growth and the aging population of Nova Scotians, looking at where services are delivered today and where they're best delivered. In one of the opening statements that both Ms. Knox and Deputy Minister LaFleche made is that this cannot be about replacing the bricks and mortars of the VG. It is about where we can best plan provincially, implement locally. It's about distribution of services. It's about what's happening, it's going to be happening over the next 30 or 50 years. We all know that services, the way the services were delivered, my background is nursing, the way the services were delivered in hospitals 20 years ago are totally different than the way that we deliver services today. We know that we're doing a lot of less invasive surgeries, so the operating theatres will look differently, as well as who's going to be in those different procedures and the teams that are going to be there. You're absolutely right. This is more about a collaborative model that we're looking into. It's why we are very intent on having the proper planning in order to get this right. Over the many, many years of healthcare services in this province across the country, it's been one of the issues, and it's one of the reasons why we are ensuring that clinical, both physicians, nurses, and other staff are involved in this planning to help us try. It's not going to be perfect by any stretch, but certainly to try to look at how can we bring teams together to prevent patients and families from having to come in, having to come in 4 times for a visit when if properly coordinated and we had some centralized booking that they could come in for one service. Patients today rarely come in for one clinic check in the RAM. So if you have, with the comorbidities that we're dealing with our aging population, you're absolutely correct. We have patients that are coming in to see a vascular surgeon one day, a cardiologist the next day, and possibly having blood work the next day. Part of this planning is a coordination of these services, where they can be delivered, and how best to meet the needs of the population of Nova Scotians.
And so earlier my colleague was asking about a plan. Can we see how consultation with patients and families, can we see a robust feedback plan from patients and families on their current experiences? Is there a report on that patient input, and is there a finalized care plan that looks forward to, like, when this HI site will actually be built, so that we can see that the best choices, the most rational and efficient choices are being made for building the hospital that we need in the future?
Ms. Bond.
Thank you. I think there were a couple of questions there. So
sorry, I'm looking for 2 plans. I'm looking for, is there a document that shows how patients and families helped to shape the care plan, and is there a finalized care plan in terms of what services we actually need delivered, when and by whom and where?
Yes, we actually have a patient family advisory committee. There was an advertisement, a public advertisement for that committee that has been in place. We are very fortunate that we have very dedicated patients and families that have been part of our planning and wayfinding and giving us input into how important it is for not only for distribution of services but the coordination of services, and we can certainly provide that for you. We do have other websites that patients and families and staff and communities can go on and offer also opinions and suggestions about what would be important for this project and well into the future, so we can provide you with that.
Thank you. I'm not sure in which opening remark I heard that there were 950 inpatients at the QE2 complex right now. What number of those on a given day would be alternate level of care patients?
Ms. Bond.
Thank you. I don't have the numbers for today. It does fluctuate. We certainly have anywhere we can have throughout the QE2, we can have up to 60 to 65 patients that are alternate level of care patients. They would include patients that have been identified as alternate level of care patients, and those patients also that are waiting for assessment as to what level of care they need. That could be going to a long-term care facility. It could be going home, and so working with families and the patient themselves to identify the appropriate needs for the patient to be discharged from acute care. You know, we understand that those are some pressures that we do see within the acute care systems across the province, and we are working with our Department of Health and Wellness, our community partners, to address those and to get teams in place to move patients to the appropriate care place with the right care provider, which is one of the principles of how we're developing the QE2 redevelopment, and that is providing care in the right place at the right time with the right care provider. And we certainly all know that that is not the priority would be in an acute care setting. Our intention is to have patients treated in acute care settings or in hospital settings when they need it and not when they don't.
And so I referred back to the Auditor General's report from June of 2016, and he presented the figure that it costs $250 a day for a long-term care bed versus $1,300 a day for a hospital bed. As part of this QE2 project, and again, looking at where we're heading with our demographics, was there any consideration of investing in more long-term care beds, in part to reduce the demand on the acute care hospital setting?
Mr. LaFleche.
So there's also the question of hospices in there, and maybe at this point it's best to let Ms. Perret address some of these questions, but because not everything you referred to is part of why we're here today, which is the QE2. Some of it is part of the broader health system. And but first I would like John just to talk about you touched on utilization, and I think it's important to understand the difference in approach we took when we started this project was not just to do a new build downtown, but rather to look broader at utilization, what you're talking about, and John can address that that issue with respect to.
So can I hear about, was there a rationale for why we aren't building more long-term care long-term care beds in order to reduce the demand on the acute care hospital?
Do you want to go? Okay, Denise will answer that.
Ms. Perret.
Thank you for the question. It's an important question, and it illustrates some of the moving parts in the system. So the short answer is yes, we're paying attention to that. As Deputy LaFleche said, that's not a key component of the QE2 redevelopment, but just as you see a horizontal team-based approach here on QE2 redevelopment, you would see that on continuing care. So in both cases, we look at population data, the demographic data, the trend analysis as to aging populations, the incidence of chronic diseases, and those plans are underway to address that. So they're on different tracks, but they're absolutely happening. Thank you.
Okay, again, going back to the June 2016 Auditor General's report, there was reference there to another innovation outside of the hospital that reduced demand on the hospital, which was the Care by Design program, which introduced rounds at long-term care and at long-term care facilities and greatly reduced transfers to hospital of residents of those long-term care beds. And the Department of Health decided to, switch away, not pursue that program. And I'm wondering if there's a rationale for that, or if there might be a return to that.
So I would say in general, because I don't know the specifics of that program, is that absolutely looking at how we move patients first out of hospitals quickly so that their time in hospital is minimal, because that's important to do. We want to move them home first, if possible, but we need to support caregivers in doing that. So we don't want to do that rashly. And absolutely in long-term care, we want to look at continuous improvement and how the quality of care in those institutions is maintained and improved. So all of that is underway in our continuing care planning, as I said, simultaneous to this type of work.
Thank you. Time has expired. We'll move to the Liberal Caucus. Mr. Wilson. Mr. Gordon Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to start off by thanking the It's a very large group. We usually don't see this large group, but I guess that does reflect the nature of the project also. And it's an opportunity always when anybody comes to public accounts to bring to Nova Scotians the work that is going on. So I do appreciate the fact that Ledge TV, hopefully we have a lot of viewers here today, but equally important, the media, to be able to let Nova Scotians know not only the importance of this project, but the complexity of it and the progress of it, of where we're at, and the work that's been done in the planning of what we're doing here today. So this is an opportunity, and I'll try and frame my questions around how we can best educate Nova Scotians and answer maybe some of the questions that my colleagues had asked that never had a chance to get answered. So to start off with, this is a very, very engaging project, to say the very least. One of the most entertaining questions that I heard asked that I thought maybe we should give a chance to have answered is the history of the planning and the integral work that we see amongst 4 different agencies here. So to either Mr. LaFleche or Mr. O'Connor, I'm not sure who, can you complete that answer to the question around how do all of these different departments work together in ensuring that this is a smooth transition in what is probably not only the largest but one of the most complex projects that we have?
Mr. O'Connor.
Yes, I'll take a stab at that. This project does go back for a number of years, as Deputy LaFleche has mentioned earlier. In 2012 and 13 timeframe, there was planning work carried out to, it was primarily focused at that time emptying out Centennial Building, and but part of it was the work at Dartmouth General. So some of that work has lived on and been added to and developed and to form the basis of the blueprint, if you will, as we spoke about earlier, for what happened at Dartmouth General already to date. So there's been good work developed as we go along. So during that time and as we moved into the updated QE2 focus in April of 2016, which was rolled out, we took the same approach. So the same approach has been a team approach. And every project that we work on, TIR manages many projects, public sector projects, and for the 30-some odd years that I've been working, you know, I've been involved in either directly or as a director or an executive director in hundreds and hundreds of project deliveries, and including the Halifax Infirmary building that is there today. I was the project manager on that back in 1990 to 96. So we follow the same approach, and almost all projects involve a user group, you know, a client department, you know, and a department that's managing delivery. So it's not unusual. This one here, it's large. And there are, you know, it has a huge reach out within the health authority. They have created, I think, in excess of, I don't know how many teams, but I think hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of meetings over the last while with all these various user groups providing input. No exaggeration, more than, you know, 100 people from their end alone. Then we have Department of Health, our department. We have a number of people. Department of Finance and Treasury Board, and Internal Service Department. So, and we've created a governance structure. At the top of that governance structure within our level is our group, the deputy ministers of those departments, those 4 departments, and the CEO, Janet Knox, standing next to me, and then the VP level, Paula, and ADMs. And we meet regularly as project updates and direction. Then we have a number of other groups, and I could have provided, I didn't bring that with me, quite a structure of oversight and governance. And so a lot of it's keeping people informed. A lot of it is working together to keep moving things along. So we have various groups together for all those reasons. And again, not unusual. That's the way we work to deliver most projects. It's just that this one has so many more components, and some pieces are, well into construction. So there are groups of people that are involved, that aren't here today at all, leading that. There are many, many, many private sector organizations now involved in these projects, design teams, planning teams. We mentioned Kasian, that's just one. We have large teams, so local consultants and others, contractors, suppliers, so it's far-reaching project. So all of that together is the way we kind of move projects along. So when we were asked about sort of who's leading it, it's a tough question sometimes because we don't want to answer it. We really want to do it together as a team. Yes, we have responsibilities back to the government at TIR, and we all have accountabilities at different points. But we are trying to build the project as a team, deliver it as a team, and I think we've been successful. The proof is sort of in the pudding, if you want to describe it that way, with the work that's already completed and well underway at Dartmouth General.
Thank you. I guess, to step back even prior to that, I have a question for the Health Authority. Obviously, the stakeholder engagement is huge. I mean, this is across so many sectors in healthcare that this impacts. Can you give me a bit of an idea of what work has been done on your part to make sure that we have had the voices of those people in the medical fields part of this? Can you give examples of when that started and is that ongoing?
Ms. Bond.
Thank you. And yes, we have had multiple stakeholder engagement, particularly with, as I said earlier, the physicians, nursing staff, and other healthcare providers, as well as public engagement. And this has been ongoing for several years now. As you recall, the previous NICM report that we had, where we, at that point, were only looking at getting out of the Centennial Building. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of meetings looking at functional plans, etc. And it was identified by the stakeholder engagement, particularly the physicians and nursing and healthcare providers and administration. And I was the VP in the former Capital Health that was leading that project as well. And it was very obvious that what the envelope that we were working with at that time was not going to be to get us the results that we needed if we were looking at long-term functional planning into the next 20 excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, 20 or 30 or 40 years. So as we moved into this particular project, which was expansion of actually decanting the VG site of the Centennial Victoria, looking at distribution of services, looking at the participation of HANS and Dartmouth General, those functional plans, we have teams that are co-led by physicians. Every single team has a physician co-lead who then has responsibility to ensuring that their physician divisions and departments are involved, communicated to, get the feedback from. We have project teams, we have functional teams, we have steering committees for all three sites, HANS, which is just completed, with physicians and the staff of HANS, including our support staff, which would be finance and IT. The IT component is critical as we move into the next 30 or 40 years, how we're going to improve delivery of care through IT systems as well, so they're also part of it. Food and nutrition, I mean, we often concentrate on, and rightfully so, the clinical delivery of care. We need to also looking at how we're going to provide things like transportation, food and nutrition, IT services, what that's going to look like into the future as well. So there's many stakeholders. We have regular meetings. We have a QE2 steering committee that's made up of the department and division, medical department heads of all of the departments across the central zone, as well as I said, administration, support staff, etc. And we certainly can provide with the list of those committees and the membership of those committees. In fact, I believe it was provided in an earlier package, but if not, I can certainly make sure that that you get the scheduling of that.
Thank you. Okay, so we've had a bit of a picture. I guess the answer is going to be interesting to read on that. There's a lot in that. On engagement, we've had an awful lot of of testimony here on how this is all coming together as a team and the work and the oversight that's going on there. I'm curious also about what work has been done prior to even the engagement on what's Nova Scotia going to look like in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years? You're not building something for today. You're building something for the future that's supposed to last 50 years. How do you come to that understanding, and when was that work done? I think that's for Department of Health, or for Health, or
almost.
Ms. Bond, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yes, thank you. Yes, we are absolutely looking at population growth. As I said earlier, we have, the QEII has an academic research teaching mandate. We're looking at evidence-based, and as we move forward with those sorts of the teaching academic mandates and how we can deliver quality care into the future, how that care is going to be changing into the future. We had a very strong team that was made up of our public health, Department of Health and Wellness, and other epidemiologists that is helping us through those scenarios and working through that.
Okay, so the past, the present, Mr. Connor.
Mr. O'Connor.
Maybe add along with that, part of the master planning work is to look out into 20, 30, 40 years too. So even with the site itself, just to sort of give some level of comfort with the development of the site at the Halifax Infirmary, looking at all the different buildings, so where we build the buildings and where they get attached now, and how we deal with the boiler plants. So it's all looking ahead to how that's going to evolve over the next 20, 30, 40, and 50 years. So that's been mapped out now as well. So it's longer term look at all of that, how a site could get repurposed into time, because things will happen. Other buildings will age out as well over time. So that's just wanted to mention that as well.
Thank you. Yes, so past, the present, and the future. I mean, I'm counting, and I might miss, 7 different individual locations. So there's the infirmary, the QE2, the Centennial Building, the CBC site, the Bears Lake site, the Dartmouth General, and the Windsor Hospital. Have I missed any? Don't think so. So Cobequid, thank you. So eight different sites. A lot of moving parts and a lot of progress to date also. I'm interested in knowing, you've touched on an awful lot of it. I think more interestingly along the progress side of where we are at today, and we've come a long ways, is as we're building the capacity in the system, we're reducing capacity in other areas, in these areas that we're going to decommission, I would assume. Can somebody give me a bit of a picture of how that balance happens, how we develop a site and then decommission a site? And I'm assuming that as we're doing that, at most points throughout that, we're actually increasing capacity to a degree for a very short window until we actually take some away. But a lot of moving parts there. I'm not sure if that's TIR or
Mr. O'Connor.
Mr. O'Connor.
Yeah, you're correct. So that's the overall planning includes, the end goal is to empty out Centennial and Victoria buildings. To get there are a lot of steps. So for example, in Dartmouth General alone, there's like 35 different steps to finish the Dartmouth General work. So for example, the addition that's being constructed now, and the structure is finished now, and we're starting to put the exterior cladding on. It's when that's open, certain things will move, including the ORs, into that space, recovery, and other spaces get emptied out, and they'll get renovated, some of those spaces to create the new ICU, then the ICU eventually gets emptied out, so on. So there are all these different little moves within that project alone, but all again leading to eventually the Dartmouth General having a net increase of 4 ORs and a net increase of 46 patient beds and other increased outpatient services and more. So that's part. So as that comes online, just like what Hans came online this month, it changes where services are being delivered from. So, and I'll let the health authority actually talk more about the service part. But really, again, it's not really about infrastructure, and that's my area. Obviously, that's our area that we're leading primarily. But the infrastructure and the bills of the infrastructure are really going to support the end plan of where services are needed, where services are going to be delivered from, and what kind of spaces they're going to be delivered out of. But it is a lot of moving, and so to take it a bit further, as new bills get added to the Halifax Infirmary site and to the Bayers Lake site, then of course that'll be the bigger part of moving the services out of the existing VG buildings. And just to remind people, there are still other services at the VG. The Mackenzie building is there, it's a lab building, so it's not going to be a completely vacant site, but nevertheless, we're focused on Centennial and Victoria primarily. So that's how it's all moving. So we have a project that's out to tender fairly soon for work at the 3rd and 5th floors in the infirmary. When that gets complete in around, we hope around 2020, that will provide additional capacity, OR capacity in the infirmary building from what's there today. That will also start having services moved out of the Centennial building. So it's all part of the plan. It's going to take a lot of steps, but the end product will be, the end result will be all the services will be moved out of the Centennial Victoria.
Thank you. I just want to move on to maybe some individual specific parts of the puzzles, and the Bayers Lake Community Outpatient Center, I think is, from my understanding, looked at the site now, is a great, it's for Nova Scotians. And I'm not sure which one of you would like to comment on it, but there are a few areas there that I'd like to understand fully of how that's going to fit into the overall redevelopment. I see Ms. Knox shaking her head. Maybe Ms. Knox.
Ms. Knox.
I'll start and Paula will continue. As we announced the QE2 redevelopment project, we said that we would be using a distributive approach to really using all of our resources in the local area to maximize access for people. And we know that in any given year, about 62,000 people drive into Halifax or somehow get into Halifax to receive services. So part of our work in this QE2 Health Sciences Centre are ambulatory services that all Nova Scotians and Atlantic Canadians actually do access. So the outpatient part of it, in terms of distributing it, is making available access to those services for people so that they do not all need to go downtown. So Paula can talk to you more about our thinking in terms of why we would need an outpatient centre outside.
Ms. Bond.
Yes, thank you. And that's exactly right. And as part of our functional plannings with the teams that looked at what services are presently being delivered in the HI and the VG, and of those services, how many patients are coming into those areas from outside to the Halifax downtown area that could be better served. There's approximately 28,000 diagnostic imaging services that we've identified that could be served out in the Cobequid area. Approximately just over 40,000 medical surgical clinics visits that could be also done in an outpatient area in Cobequid. Dialysis, we're looking at the patient dialysis population that are having to come into the HI and the VG sites right now that could easily be served much better out in a community centre. Did I get the chat? Oh. That could be served out into the community centre, preventing patients. What part of the overall patient and family input that we've been receiving is that they have said to us that some of the most upsetting things for patients and family is actually driving into downtown Halifax and finding parking, which is extremely stressful. So anywhere, including Cobequid, Dartmouth General, anywhere that we can provide those services that alleviate those sorts of stresses are also in our guiding principles of where services should be delivered.
Thank you. And I guess my time's almost wrapping up, but before I do pass it on, I think Mr. O'Connor mentioned 100 people. I believe probably more than 100 people are actually working on this file within all the different departments and I do want to say thank you to those people. Again, we sometimes overlook our hardworking civil servants that we have out there and appreciate the good work that they put in every day. We're very proud. Thank you.
Order. We'll move to Mr. Houston of the PC Caucus for 14 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In December, we got the capital budget for roads. I don't think we've heard much more on the capital budget. Maybe Deputy LaFleche can give us an indication when we can expect kind of what I would see as the rest of the capital budget for buildings and stuff.
Mr. LaFleche.
Okay, well, the capital budget is really the responsibility of the Deputy Minister of Finance and Treasury Board, but I don't want to give you a non-answer like that. So I can tell you that in terms of my responsibility, we have buildings and we have roads. You've seen the road one. That hasn't changed, that's out there. And we do that for a reason, is because we want to get the tenders out, we want to get the best price for tenders, et cetera, et cetera. So most years the capital budgets are separate and the road one comes quite a bit earlier, and that's what you've seen. My understanding is that the capital budget for the rest of the province, including the buildings, which we would have responsibility for, will be coming very shortly, but I can't give you an exact date. I'm not in charge of the process. We are working on the schools, though, and the various public buildings that are part of it, as well as the major maintenance, which would be part of capital.
Okay. Would people reasonably expect to see something in the capital budget for this project?
Well, the health capital, John can speak to that. The health capital is part of it is part of the overall capital. It's just called something a little different. It's called health capital instead of tangible capital, but it's the same essential thing. John, do you want to go into that at all?
And just because I'm clear, like, so the health capital is under your responsibility, right? Your department has responsibility for...
We're part of it. So really, all capital is under the responsibility, really, of the Deputy Minister of Finance and Treasury Board. But yes, we would be making the submissions. So John would be closely involved, along with Tom Guthrow, who's the executive director of design and planning, on all of the public buildings, which would include the health buildings, and we would be submitting those budgets, which would include the cash flows year by year. So John, do you want to say anything about the capital budget at all?
Yeah, Mr. O'Connor. Maybe Mr. O'Connor can clarify. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I was trying to find out what do we have in terms of estimates, and then if we would have had a number there, then I would have tried to figure out over how many years and this type of stuff to figure out kind of what we're looking at. So in the absence of that, I guess now what I'm going to try to figure out is we will have is there going to be a big number in the capital budget this year for this project, or are the big numbers that hit the budget still years away? I guess that's the best way I can ask it, I guess.
I probably can answer it, is that like all public projects, we work with the Department of Finance and Treasury Board and the client departments about, whether a project, at the planning stages, we have certain approvals, and we have approvals to do the planning. So that money is in the budget. That money is forecasted. We forecast regularly on every capital project, together with the Department of Health in this case, and for other projects, Department of Education, so on. So what we budget for and what we forecast are for projects that are approved. So for Dartmouth General, for example, the monies that have been approved there, they're in the capital program, they're forecasted, they're planned.
Okay, so would that be fair to say, Deputy LaFleche earlier referred to 138 million as announced, or somewhere in that range as announced. So what we see in the budget is what we're going to see announced shortly, I guess.
We would see projects like that, projects that have been approved. So with this particular project, the approvals to date are around the planning work, and then when we go to government and we seek additional approvals, then the additional commitments would get added to the capital program.
So probably no big number this year in the capital budget for this project. I wouldn't. Maybe more planning, maybe.
Part of our work is working with the Finance and Treasury Board, and as we mentioned earlier about the analysis we're doing, whether we deliver P3 or traditional, a lot of that work will also include how does that look from a cash flow perspective, how does that look from how it's dealt with in the capital program and so on. So all those pieces will be part of the information provided to government.
Okay.
Do you want to mention, as we are building
Mr. LaFleche?
As we are building Dartmouth, the numbers will ramp up fairly quickly.
Okay.
And it's just that what you'll see in the annual capital budget of the government is just the cash flow capital-wise for that particular year. So you don't see the whole project in that budget. And that's what's going to be somewhat deceptive in that people will not be able to add up multiple years of numbers and say that's what the project costs. What they will see, though, is that this spending is ramping up as we ramp up the project. As for any school, the first year is planning, and then we hit construction. All buildings are like that.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that clarification. So Deloitte, it came up earlier a little bit briefly, it was mentioned, Deloitte was engaged to explore public and private sector-led options. So what is it that we can specifically expect Deloitte to deliver, and when can we expect that delivered?
Go to Mr. Ward. I'm sorry, Mr. Porter.
Okay. Thank you for the question. The specific deliverable that Deloitte will have for us sometime in the April-May timeframe, which John alluded to earlier, is a business case that would recommend a procurement model for two specific sites, the Halifax Infirmary and the Bayers Lake sites, because they're greenfield sites. They're not renovations. They are new builds, which typically lend themselves better to consideration. In preparing that business case, they will look at a number of things. They will first, as I mentioned, rely on the work that they've learned from other jurisdictions in Ontario, Quebec, BC, Saskatchewan, the UK, Australia, and embed some best practice into how they conduct that business case to formulate their recommendation. At the end of the day, they'll compare two models, one a traditional delivery and the second an alternative procurement model, which you commonly see in Ontario as design, build, finance, and maintain models. That's not to presuppose what it will look like, but it's a very common model in the country. And they will also assess our capability as part of that and recommend an implementation plan. So obviously, if you build something yourself, it requires a skill set, and some of which we have within TIR in the province and readily available in the private sector. In going to a P3, it's going to cause us to rely on different skill sets. A lot more emphasis on expert procurement.
So just if I can stop you there. So is the expectation that Deloitte will deliver a recommendation as to whether this should be a P3 or not?
Correct.
That's the expectation.
And how we would go about doing that, yes, sir.
Okay, so that report is expected in April, May, and they're going to look at things that happen in Ontario. I hear about Ontario a lot in this chamber, a lot of different things here. But so Deloitte will deliver a recommendation. Will there be a commitment to make that report public?
We'll have to assess that at the time. Obviously, as Paul mentioned earlier, some of the information contained in that business case will be commercially confidential, and we wouldn't want to, put numbers out into the private sector in terms of what we anticipate the cost would be to keep that process meaningful for us in terms of value for money. But certainly, there would be some justification for the direction that would be taken at that time.
And how much will Deloitte be paid?
That's a little bit uncertain at the moment. It will depend very much on the amount of work that will go into the value for money. So for example, part of a value for money assessment or a business case would be a market sounding. So we would Deloitte.
No, but for the work that they're so they're going to deliver something in April, May. Is there an agreement that deliver me this and I'm going to pay you
Yep.
And how much is that amount?
And the scope will change over the course of the next 4 to 5 months due to whatever off-ramps might be present in the
wouldn't
process.
That take place? Wouldn't those scope changes take place after you got the initial report? So you're expecting a report in April, May. It's not that far away. So they know what the scope of that work is for that report at this stage, I would presume.
Sure, I can say a couple things about that. So part of the process is a market sounding. A market sounding is where you approach financiers, contractors, facility maintenance providers, and you outline the general nature of the project and its relative value, and they make a determination of whether they're interested.
So are they doing that now?
They will do that in the coming months. First of all,
so that's the next phase.
First of all, we need to have the master plan function.
Okay, so I just want to, I had to move on, but I mean, so there's an expectation they're going to make a recommendation in April, May. My initial understanding from this conversation was that that recommendation would basically be P3 or not, but it's not. That's not what's going to happen in April, May. They're going to deliver something in April, May that's not going to be. What is it that they're going to deliver in April, May? Because
they will deliver a recommendation in that time frame.
Okay, so we're going to pay them. The province is paying them to make a recommendation whether it should be P3 or not.
Yes.
And how much are we paying
with the supporting work? I can give you a rough estimate of that.
Sure, that's fine.
There are things that could change between now and then. The rough estimate is around 500,000.
Okay, that's fine.
You have until 10/27.
Okay, and then, thank you. And then after we get that recommendation, then the market studies and everything would start.
The market sounding actually would be part of that process. What they will give us at the end of the day is a recommendation. They will give us an implementation plan, and they'll give us an assessment of what resources and capabilities we will need to build to perform whatever process. Even if it's a traditional build, moving forward in the manner that we are, this is a very, very large project, and we may need to fill some gaps, which they'll help identify as well through the course of that work.
Thank you for that. I do want to talk just about Bayers Lake a little bit. It came up earlier about some of the services that would be at Bayers Lake and kind of making it more user-friendly, I guess, in terms of more one-stop. But there is, I don't know when the last time anyone was at Bayers Lake, but it can be a hard place to get into and around. Like there's definitely some traffic issues there. Is there any plan to work with HRM on improving traffic flow into Bayers Lake or improving busing, or are you at those level of discussions yet?
Mr. O'Connor.
The answer is yes, we are at that level of discussion. We've had discussions all along with HRM around transportation and busing. What you see at Bayers Lake now is not what you're going to see when the work is complete. There are a number of new roads that are going to be built into that area that's being developed. That's about a 175-acre parcel of land. We're dealing with about 15 acres out of that. There are new road network systems, for example. I think most people know the streets I'll mention, like Susie Lake Crescent is going to move out be expanded out into that site. Hopkins, which comes in the backside of Access Nova Scotia, that road will be extended through up into that area as well. Another road up from the Burger King side of a Chain Lake Drive. So there'll be a number of different streets, roads, if you will, that'll lead into that whole development. And so the access will be much different than what you see there now. So access down through Washmill.
So who would pay for that road development?
That's all part of the private sector development that's approved by HRM.
So the province won't be paying
the province.
The private sector will be paying for those?
That's correct.
Okay. And are you in any discussions with HRM on busing? Because I think at the time when the purchase announced I thought HRM was kind of surprised, right? They said, well, they kind of spoke out against that location a little bit at the time. Has that kind of been soothed over? Or?
Just have 10 seconds remaining.
I would say it's been soothed over, and yes, we're in conversations with them, and we've committed to further conversations, and we're all in favor of them increasing buses, and we're trying to encourage them to look to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Time has expired. We'll move to the NDP. The Honourable Dave Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back to the decision that will be made come April or around that area, around the recommendations that government will be presented either through a P3 model of redevelopment or a transitional traditional build that we've seen in the past. Do you anticipate, or do you have a timeline on and I guess it would be up to government, but I'll have to ask anyways. Do you anticipate a timeline on getting an answer from government once that report lands on the table of a number of ministers, the Premier, I would assume, and ultimately Treasury Board, I guess? Mr. Porter.
The question of timing around when government makes a decision, I'll leave, but I would like to comment that when we talk April, May, I think it's likely May, and there are some things that along the way that would and could influence the timing around that. And some of those things could be, you know, whether or not the Bayers Lake site and the Halifax Infirmary site are seen together or separately, the amount of due diligence that goes into the collecting the empirical data necessary to make a true comparison between a traditional approach versus a alternative delivery approach. So our plan right now has us into May in terms of the recommendation. I will add also that, you know, market sounding or determining if there's a market interest in a project like this is an important part of the process that happens earlier than that. And if we find there's no market interest, then really the business case, you know, comes to a conclusion fairly quickly.
So how was that timeline set providing the government with recommendations? Like, so to me, when I hear this, you know, I predict it's going to be at least another year before funding would be allocated. The budget preparation for this year has taken place. We're going to be debating the budget in this chamber in a couple weeks. So I anticipate that decision, the budget, the money won't be there in this budget. So there's another year delay. So how was that timeline set? Why are we not seeing January of a timeline of a recommendation going to government so that they could change the budget or implement recommendations in that? Like, where did that come up? Who made that decision to have a recommendation go to government in May after the fiscal budget will be debated in the House?
Go to Ms. I'm seeing two people wishing to respond. Okay, Mr. Porter. Mr. Porter.
Just on the first part, just in terms of the significance of the timing around May, you know, a recommendation at that point, I mean, it's not as linear a process. There's still a lot of work that would need to be done, regardless of which procurement method would be undertaken. You know, output specifications being developed, tender documents being developed. So there's a lot of work that would go into actually whatever method is recommended at that point, without necessarily the commitment of funds at that point. So I'll turn it to others to
I mean, I'm satisfied with that. Would you anticipate then the government would have enough time to include it in the budget preparations that usually start around September, August, September? I think departments are asked to start looking at what they want to see in the next year's budget. Would you anticipate would there be enough time from the report in May to the fall, early fall, so that next year's budget we may see a decision? Is that, I don't know if that's a question.
Mr. LaFleche.
I think the government is committed to proceeding with this project. It knows that it's a project with a specific timing that Nova Scotians need to see the closure of the Victoria and the Centennial buildings, and they want to see this project operational. So I doubt they're going to worry about the niceties of budget cycle. I will point out this is a capital budget, not an operating, so it's not tied to the operating budget except through the depreciated amounts, which comes post-construction many years down the road. So I think the government will consider this in whatever timing it comes in, and will act expeditiously to ensure that Nova Scotians get the services they want when they want it. I do want to point out that Mr. Porter has let something slip there, but that's fine. He's allowed to do these things. That we're only looking at those two sites for a P3, so we're not looking at any other sites. And you might also notice that the last time we were here, we explained we didn't do a P3 on the Dartmouth General, even though it was of sufficient scale to possibly do a P3. We're looking very, very carefully at P3s. We know, you know, there's a debate around them in the public. There's misconceptions, and but there's a lot of use of them throughout Canada, and it behooves us to ensure that Nova Scotians get the best value possible. Other provinces are doing lots of P3s. We need to look at P3s. We are probably at the bottom end of the scale in terms of size for interesting. Gary referred to quite appropriately that's market interest. So we're at the bottom end.
I get it that you're all in for P3s. We have difference of opinion.
No, we're not all in for P3s.
I'll share my time with my colleague.
Mr. Roberts.
Thank you very much. I want to go back for a moment to the Bears Lake site for the outpatient clinic. There was a access to information release that came out and was reported on last May that noted that the Highway 102 and the Lacewood interchange near that site is nearing capacity and that there are limited options for further improvements. Now, TIR would, I imagine, be on the hook if there needed to be additional work done to add new interchanges if that large block of land that you're describing is actually to be developed. Is that not correct?
Mr. LaFleche.
You probably know we are replacing the 102-103 interchange. That was announced about a year ago. It's a federal, provincial project, quite large project to replace and modernize and change the radius of curvature on that interchange. In fact, we're building the new interchange around the old one, much like they're building the Champlain Bridge in Montreal. So we respond as we do everywhere in the province, to capacity issues in terms of highway prioritization. So we will be looking closely at any capacity issues, not only there, but anywhere in Nova Scotia, but particularly in the growth areas around Halifax. So when we have capacity issues, we bring forward projects.
Well, and certainly I would just like to make the point that by committing through the purchase of land and the announcement of that outpatient clinic to really an anchor development on a currently undeveloped parcel of land, you're basically ensuring that there will be additional capacity needs. So to some extent here, the provincial government is driving an urban development agenda that HRM had not bought into.
Can I respond to that? I'd rather my chief engineer pronounce on whether or not we are driving any capacity changes there. I wouldn't take that as a fait accompli. And no, we are being very careful to work closely with HRM. Their concerns were over bike access, and there is a bike trail there to that facility, a paved bike trail that HRM has already paved, so there's no new expense there. And their other concern was on transit, and we had extensive discussions with them on transit. They have not mentioned to us, to my knowledge, John, any road access issues, have they?
Mr. O'Connor?
If you will, just quickly, HRM approved the development. The entire development is approved by them. All we're doing is buying a parcel of land in a development that they approved. All these roads I mentioned earlier, that's part of the development that's been approved by that developer has requested approval and got approval. We had nothing to do with that process. We just were out searching for property, and we searched for all properties that were available of a size that we, in certain areas outside the downtown core. So we didn't create the development. We were just buying a piece of land in it.
Okay, thank you. Since that outpatient clinic was announced, the Premier has said to the media that people who are currently living on the peninsula and are concerned about accessing outpatient services, for whom a bus trip to that location would be in the realm of 1.5 to 2 hours, that site and those services will not be the only location for those services. And at the same time today, I've heard that the Halifax infirmary site, the new development there is going to be oriented towards those very complex specialist services like oncology and organ transplantation. So where is this other outpatient site where residents who would rely on public transit, for example, where would they access those services? Where is that anticipated?
Ms. Bond.
Thank you for that question. For a point of clarification, the services that I referred to, which were multi-organ transplant and those specialized services that are required only at the Halifax Infirmary for Nova Scotians, are only portions of the services that we deliver. The QE2 is also a community hospital for patients and families on the peninsula. We do deliver clinics at the QE2, and will continue to deliver clinics at the QE2. The functional planning work that was done was to identify of the services such as medical, surgical clinics, nephrology, those services, diagnostic imaging, laboratory services, of the services that are delivered downtown Halifax, which portion of those could we actually deliver outside of the HRM? In particular for patients who are traveling into the HRM. And it's not in any way to say there will be a new ambulatory centre also on the QE2 site of the Halifax Infirmary to continue to provide those services. There won't be any service, just like we have at Cobequid right now. We deliver multiple services at Cobequid. They are not services that are uniquely to Cobequid, nor will they be services that are uniquely at the community centre.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. In terms of the ER capacity at the Halifax Infirmary, my understanding is, I mean, as was talked about earlier, every subspecialty is available at the Halifax Infirmary site, and it's also a site of training. Is there planning going forward to allow ER usage that is appropriate in terms of the level of specialist services provided, that is appropriate to also the needs of a general ER visit that you would see at any spot in the province? I mean, there are people coming in with relatively simple health issues that still require an ER visit but don't need specialist attention. So is there any planning going forward to ensure that the fact that all of the bells and whistles are available does not mean that all the bells and whistles get used when somebody comes in with COPD, for example?
Ms. Bond.
Thank you. So there is planning and a provincial emergency program of care. So we have planning provincially for the emergency services. You're absolutely correct. Not every visit to an emergency department. We have different levels of emergency departments throughout this province. In terms of the community centre, we are planning for an urgent access clinic in that centre so that there is availability in the community centre so the patients don't have to go into emergency rooms.
I'm sorry, so what community centre are you referring to?
Bears Lake Community Centre.
And so is there going to be a community centre of that nature at the Halifax Infirmary site for people who are on, in the downtown core?
Yes, we're working with primary care, and there's also a provincial primary care plan to look at the needs of patients and families that do not need to come into the emergency department. I do want to clarify some myths that are out there that you may not need to go into an emergency department, that you could go to a family physician, which is absolutely true. However, there are also situations where you do need to go to an emergency department, although it's not a life or limb situation, but you may need to have suturing that may not be offered in your family physician's office. So there's many situations that we are working with primary...
Time has expired. We'll move to the Liberal Caucus. Ms. Lonis-Croft.
I'll let you finish that line of questioning.
Ms. Bond, you can continue replying to the question.
Hope I can remember. Yes, so we are identifying across the province on the provincial program of care, which is emergency services, primary health care services, where the services are required, at what levels. Emergency departments have levelling of everything from the level 1, which is the trauma centre, which is at the QE2, level 2, 3s and 4s. Level 3s and 4s are more what we consider urgent care, access care for individuals who need be that appropriate level and the appropriate individuals who would be required. A level 1 emergency department, the standards for both nurses, paramedics, physicians and others is a different level of education that is required than if you're looking at what we would call a level 4 emergency department or an urgent care centre, which we can have nurse practitioners or advanced care nurses, advanced care paramedics working in those areas and delivering services.
And that will be at the infirmary site?
We're looking at all sites across the province, but certainly at the infirmary site we're looking at how we can complement the emergency department with the appropriate services so that we're not having the patients have to go in and wait and be triaged in the emergency department if we can sort of divert those, for lack of a better word at the moment, patients to an area that more rapidly. We actually do that in the emergency department at the moment. We have different pods where depending on how you're triaged, how sick you are, then you are triaged off to some of those pods in the Halifax Infirmary. Some of those, what we call less urgent pods, are already staffed by advanced care paramedics. So not everybody's waiting to come into the direct emergency department, even at the QE2.
And there are walk-in clinics, are there not, in the central area of Halifax?
There are walk-in clinics, not at the Halifax Infirmary.
Yeah, but they're still, yes. And they will remain, which are run by the Nova Scotia Health Authority? No, they're not. They're private. Okay. Mr. LaFleche, you said that this is your largest construction project ever taken on by TIR?
Mr. LaFleche.
Yes, directly. I mean, we've had a few large projects. We've of course had the Sydney Tar Ponds, which was about $420 million. We just had the Nova Centre, although we didn't have to supervise all the construction. John's just finished. In fact, he's going to run out of here to try and achieve substantial completion shortly. And that's a fairly large project. But this, at the end of the day, when we determine the final scope, and that's one of the reasons we can't give final numbers, is because since Mr. Wilson's day, the scope has changed, right? It's a much broader scope than it was before. So there are more things included, so that means more cost, more square footage, etc. So when we determine and finalize the final scope after we see the Keynesian study and see where it gets approved, then we will have a fairly large project here, probably the largest in Nova Scotia. I can't speak to inflation and whether there was a larger project inflation adjusted in 1852 or not, but it's the largest certainly in our memory.
Okay. And though this is happening in HRM, this redevelopment is for all Nova Scotians. It's not just for people who live in HRM.
In some cases for all Atlantic Canadians, yes, because we are a unique service centre for Atlantic Canada in some instances.
So how is this going to benefit, I'm a rural MLA, so how is this going to benefit my people, other than, you know, those who come up for cardiac care and whatnot that are specializations? So how are we in rural Nova Scotia going to get better use of this facility overall?
Okay, well, I'm going to turn that over, I think, to Janet, who can probably talk about the province in general.
Ms. Knox.
Thank you for that question. I think that's a very, very important question. This, the QE2 Health Sciences Centre is our centre where the most advanced acute care for the people of this province, and as Mr. LaFleche is saying, for many Atlantic Canadians occurs. And so it is also our centre where, which is affiliated directly with our medical school and our Faculty of Health Professions at Dalhousie. It is also the centre where we have 1,200 research projects. So it is Nova Scotians' advanced care centre available to all Nova Scotians. How do people in your local area see this? I hope they see this as an integrated part of the fabric of the health system for Nova Scotians. We have built in this province, have started many years ago, an integrated community-based system. We say the focus is on supporting people in their local communities and a network of emergency rooms and hospital system around them. And so in your constituency, your members should be able to get, if they need to go to the QE2, be referred to the advanced care at the QE2 and be returned home to be supported by their local community providers. That's how that we are positioning this very important resource. It's a resource for all Nova Scotians.
Okay, so like at this complex that will be in Bears Lake, is it going to be like the Cobequid, sort of emergency care and outpatient services that people in rural Nova Scotia, I mean, they come to Costco once or twice a week. Why not go there for care?
So I'm going to ask Paula, because Paula is our lead for the planning of this work, but I want to say to you that we are looking at when we plan, we look at the province in terms of who the people are and what their needs are, where they live, and how do they access services. So I can tell you that even in our planning around where should collaborative care centres be in this province, in our drive, the Royal Hour, when our team drove Nova Scotia and met with care providers in local communities, they also asked community members, where do they shop, where do they worship, how do they travel around their communities. So we think about those things as we're planning and try to make our services accessible to people in the way they like to access them. So I'll let Paula Bond, if I could, talk about how we see that Bears Lake Centre.
Ms. Bond.
Thank you. So just to clarify, Cobequid is actually an emergency department. We have EHS that actually takes people to that Cobequid, and a lot of people often are transferred from Cobequid, depending on the acuity, how sick they are, to the Dartmouth General or the Halifax Infirmary. The community centre at Bears Lake will not have an emergency department. It will have an urgent access clinic. So it will be available for patients as a drop-in. There will be drop-in appointments that are open for patients, as well as booked appointments. We will have medical and surgical clinics there, so that we're hoping to be able to better coordinate. So if you do come in, I think somebody, and I apologize, I don't recall who, mentioned COPD is a perfect example. If you had somebody come in through the urgent care centre with COPD, and we had clinics available, we're going to try to coordinate so that there's open appointments there in some of those specialty clinics that you can be referred directly to that clinic that day in hopes to prevent patients from having to come back. So it really is about where the best services for the appropriate care, appropriate time, the appropriate caregiver, and really what we're really stressing as clinicians, because we hear it all the time, and certainly in my past life as a clinical nurse, we saw it on multiple occasions. So it will be an urgent care access clinic, and hopefully be able to have the coordination where necessary through those clinics that are going to be at Bears Lake.
So can children access care there, or do they have to go to the IWK? No, the IWK will remain the children's for this province, for the emergency department. To determine what populations come in would determine, that's still part of the functional planning. We are working with our IWK partners to look at, because as you know, many other emergency and urgent care centres across the province do see children. Children are not just seen at the IWK, so we're in the process of looking at what resources would be required if we were to have the pediatric population, and we're working with, as I said, our colleagues at IWK to determine where the best fit for that would be. Okay, thank you. I want to talk about the chemo prep project that's happening, and would that'd be under the Health Authority? Okay, we'll continue. I see the design is portable. So do you want to explain, like, you know, the design and how being portable is going to be beneficial during this transition?
I may have to ask some help from my TIR colleagues about the actual design, but I will tell you that the chemo prep room has been identified over the last couple of years now as an area that we really could not wait in order to do the renovations that's required for that prep room. It is the only chemo area where we provide that service at the VG site, and should it go down, it would be detrimental to the citizens of Nova Scotia. It is why we brought it forward to the oncology program, brought it forward to the senior team, and we brought it forward to government to expedite. One of the questions, and rightfully so, that we asked was, well, how much is that going to cost to renovate, and should we change that in the near future? What's the risks and the pros and cons of doing that now? And so part of the design work that we asked, and again, I think I'll hand it to this part to John, was to ensure that there's lots of things happening today which are modular. ORs are being built as modular. You know, that you're having walls that can be opened and closed to make multiple OR rooms or very large operating theatres to accommodate the more complex surgeries. So we know from the work that we've been doing and the research that there's lots of opportunities that where we can look at those different designs in order to ensure we can change and have flexibilities in our designs as the services change, whether it's the infrastructure of the services or whether it's the services themselves. But to the actual design, if I may.
Mr. O'Connor.
You answered that one well, Paula. It's flexibility in design. So the flexibility that's being built into the chemo prep design work, and it's at the early stages, is really around the same as Spawn referred to. It's about looking ahead. If changes get made in the future, you know, the way that the infrastructure gets built, some of the equipment that's brought in has some flexibility to be moved around, things to change and adapt in the future without as extensive of renovation. So that's being sort of kept in mind, and then flexibility with building systems that lends itself better to changes, because healthcare systems and healthcare services, you know, as we all know, change as time goes on.
Okay, thank you. Mr. LaFleche, you said that there are lots of misconceptions around P3 builds. Can you further explain what those misconceptions are?
Mr. LaFleche.
Well, I think a lot of people take just an ideological view of P3. P3 has been applied to many different types of builds. In fact, right now we're just finishing up, John's trying to finish up today a P3 build which was approved by the Dexter government, and I appreciate Mr. Wilson. I don't think you were in cabinet at that time. It probably started before you got in cabinet. So, but anyway, that's a P3 build, the new trade center, part of the Nova Center, and that's we feel been very beneficial for us, and that we got a fixed price. Schedule did slip, but the price didn't, which was very good, and we got what we want. We have had a P3 at the Cobequid. We were in here talking the Cobequid Pass Highway. We talked about that a couple of months ago. And I think in every major project, 100 million plus, like our neighbors do, we must, for Nova Scotians, examine whether it could be P3 or not. We looked at it for the Dartmouth General, 138 odd million, and we decided it wasn't really that suitable. The benefits were not there. We're looking at it for the two other sites Mr. Porter described, and in answer to Minister Houston's question, Mr. Porter really couldn't answer it. You know, we will be revealing all of the information we can when we can on those P3 analyses. We think it needs to get out there in the public, and whether we go P3 or not for those two sites, or one of the two or none of the two, we'll be getting valuable information from those studies that can allow us to get possibly a better deal for Nova Scotians in terms of the build, P3 or not. So once we get that better deal, and we can reveal some of the information, we will be putting it out in the public to the extent we can.
Time has expired for questions. I did let you go beyond a bit. We have just about a minute left for each entity to provide a closing statement if you wish. It's not necessary. Would anybody like to provide a closing statement? Ms. Knox.
I just want to say thank you for your interest in this project, and I want to say again how pleased we are to have this collaborative effort. We've put a lot of effort into creating how we work well together. We are very committed to managing this project together on time, on budget. It is so important to the fabric of the health system of Nova Scotia, and as I've said, Atlantic Canadian. So thank you for your very considered interest. This is a very important project as we go forward together.
Thank you, Ms. Knox. Mr. LaFleche.
Thank you also.
Order. Mr. LaFleche, you have the floor.
We've got a serious mandate from the government to deliver the best value for Nova Scotians expeditiously and to ensure that this project serves the future needs of future generations of Nova Scotians. So we're working very hard on it. I did create a little bit earlier when Mr. Houston asked me who was responsible. I neglected to say that Jeff Conrad would also be fired if we screwed up. So I want to just make that correction and make sure that he doesn't feel he's left out.
Thank you. If there's no further statements, unless there is, no, there's not, okay. Would like to thank all of you for being here today. This is, I think, one of the largest meetings we've ever had in terms of people, which shows the size of this project. Thank you for being here. Thank you for answering our questions. We have no committee business unless somebody wishes to bring something forward. Hearing nothing, our next meeting is on March 7th, where we will have the Department of Agriculture as a witness to discuss wine development. That's on March 7th. This meeting is adjourned.